This is Unit 8.
This is Unit 8, Formative 1, Video 2, Factoring.
So we've seen this form before. In this form.
So it's sort
It's
of
like
the
standard
AX.
form. So we have
squared plus BX plus C.
Remember that.
Whenever we factor trinomials, we want everything in this form. Alright, so you need to take your highest exponent, which in this case is a 2, and then move down. So for 2, 1, and then this is like having an exponent of 0. Okay. Sometimes terms are missing, but it's okay. Just make sure it's always in this form where you have your highest exponent first. Okay. Alright, so we're going to factor trinomials. So our answer is going to look like our questions from last unit. So remember, our answers were with 2 sets of parentheses. Our questions were. So now our answer is going to be like that. I'm going to erase those just to get those out of the way. Okay. Alright, so here's the steps. Okay, there's several steps, so just keep up with them. Your first step is you are going to multiply your A times your C. Okay, so you're going to take your A term times your C term. Okay, and we're going to make a little table here. And I take 3 times negative 10 and I get negative 30. Okay. You want that to add up to your B term. In this case, my B is a positive 13. Now what you're going to do is on the left here, you're going to find factors of negative 30. Now when you find factors, remember you're multiplying. So I'm going to multiply 2 things together and I want it to get negative 30. All right? And then I'm going to add them and put that number here. All right, so let's do. I always start with 1, okay? Now I know I want a negative, so I'm going to have negative 1 and a positive 30, okay? So if I want a negative number, when I multiply, I know I need to have 1 negative and 1 positive. Now when I add those, I get 29, okay? We want 13, okay? That's not 13. So now I need to go and do negative 2 and 15. When I multiply those, I get negative 30. When I add, I get 13, okay? Which is what I wanted, okay? So these are going to be the 2 terms I'm going to use with my 6. So what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite. So I have 3x squared. Now instead of the 13x, I am going to put the 2 terms that I had. Let me get some space here. Okay. So I'm going to replace the 13 because negative 2x plus 15 is 13x. So I really didn't change the problem, I just changed factors. Okay. Now we are going to group. Okay, so I'm going to group. Make sure this plus sign stays in between the parentheses. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to factor out what they have in common. So I'm going to look at 3x squared and 2x. Okay, 3 and 2, there's no number that'll go into them. However, they do have an x that'll go. So I'm going to factor out an x. All right, remember when we factor out an x, it's dividing. So I have 3x minus 2. All right. Now I'm going to bring this plus sign down. Now 15x and 10. Factor out a number that'll go into 15 and 10 is 5. Okay, so I'm going to divide by 5. And I end up with 3x minus 2. Now if you notice here, 3x minus 2, 3x minus 2, those will always be the same. If they're not, you did something wrong. Okay. All right, now for our answer, okay, we are going to take the 2 things we factored out and put them in parentheses together. So I have x plus 5, okay, and then what they shared goes in your next set of parentheses, and this is your answer. It doesn't matter which one you do first, as long as you're grouping them the same. Okay. All right, let's try another one. So I'm going to draw my table. All right, remember this is A times C and this is B. So 2 times negative 15 is negative 30. Oh, we got negative 30 again. And then my B term is 1. Okay. Now again, I have a negative, so I need to multiply a negative and a positive. So again, I always start with 1. Even though I know it's just easier, you don't skip anything. Okay, negative 2 and 15 gives me 13. 3 will go in. Negative 3 and 10 is 7. 4 won't go in it, 5 will. Okay, is 1. Okay, and that's what I wanted. So these are going to be my two replacement factors. Okay, so I have 2x squared. Now instead of x, I'm going to put negative 5x plus 6x minus 15. Okay. Now another thing, just to sort of help, I recommend if you have a positive and a negative to always do your negative first. Okay, then you don't have to factor out a negative. So always do your negative first. Right now I am going to group them. So I'm going to group the two together and these two together. Right, again, remember there's a plus there. If that's a negative, you have to factor out a negative. So it's easier to make sure your plus sign's there. Okay. Now I'm going to take and factor out what 2x squared and 5x have in common, which is just an x. So I'm going to factor out an x. So I have 2x minus 5. Right. Bring down my plus sign. Now 6x and 15, they don't have an x in common, but they do have a 3. So I'm going to factor a 3 out, which would be 2x minus 5. Again, make sure these are always the same. Okay. All right, so I'm going to take what I factored out and put them in parentheses together. Okay. And then what they have in common. It's going to go on the other side. And this is my answer. Okay. All right. All right, next one. So we have A times C and it equals B. Okay. All right, so A times C, now remember that's a 1. So 1 times 12 is 12. And my B term is negative 7. All right. Now here, I multiply to get a positive, but when I add them, I get a negative. So think about it. So if I take 12 and 1, if I multiply them, I get a positive 12. But if I add them, am I going to get a negative answer? Okay. No. So that should tell you that you have two negatives here. Okay. And that would be negative 13, which is not what I want. So we're going to go negative 2 and negative 6. You multiply them, I get a positive 12. When I add them, I get negative 8. That's not what I want. Okay, now let's try negative 3 and negative 4. Multiply them, I get positive 12. When I add, I get a negative 7. So these are the two I want. Okay. So now I'm going to replace my 7x. My negative. So we have x squared minus 3x minus 4x plus 12. Okay. Now they're both negative, so I couldn't do the negative first. Okay. So now I'm going to group them. So this is where you have to be careful when you have a negative in between. So this one's fine, but when I group this one and I factor out a negative, you need to make sure you change this sign to the opposite of what it is. So it's positive, so now it's a negative. Okay. Now you'll find that mistake later on if you don't do it in the problem. So, all right, so first one, x squared and 3x. So x will go into both of them. So I'm going to factor an x out. That leaves me with x minus 3. Okay. Now I'm going to bring down my minus. Okay, 4x and negative 12. 4 will go into both of them. So I have my 4. And then I get x and then minus 3. Okay. Now if this were a plus, and this is a minus, you know you forgot to change your negative. Okay, so go back and change the negative. So again, make sure these are exactly the same. Okay, if this was a plus sign, that means you forgot to change that when you had to factor out the negative. All right, and last, our answer. Take what you group. So we have x minus 4, and then x minus 3. And that's going to be our answer. Last one. Okay, now this one's missing a term. All right, now you need to recognize what term it's missing. Remember we have ax squared plus bx plus c. It has the x squared and it has the c. So it's missing the b. So the problem actually looks like this. Oops. Okay. All right, so a times c. So we're going to take 4 times negative 9, and we get negative 36. And my b term is a 0. So if the term is missing, it's just going to be a 0. So now we need factors. So -1 and a positive 36 gives me 35. -2 and 18 gives me 16. -3 and 12 gives me 9. -4 and 9 gives me 5. 5 won't go into it, 6 will. -6 and 6 gives me 0. So that's what we wanted. So here are our two replacements. Okay. Now, when you do this, remember we have a negative and a positive, so we want to put the negative first. So we have a 4x squared minus 6x plus 6x minus 9. Now let's group them. All right, so the first one, 4x squared and 6x squared, I have 2x that'll come out. So 4 divided by 2 is 2, and then minus 3, plus 6x and 9, I have a 3 that I can factor out. And that would leave me with 2x minus 3. So now I'm going to take my two things I factored out, put them together, and then what they have in common. And there's my answer. Factoring trinomials. You guys have a great day.